The email blinked on my laptop screen, its subject line a stark, brutal sentence, divorce papers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. David! My David! After 8 years. This couldn't be happening. 8 years of building a life. Of shared dreams, whispered secrets, and what I thought was unwavering love. 8 years down the drain, reduced to a sterile legal document delivered electronically. I stared at the screen, the cursor mocking me with its rhythmic pulse. Divorce? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I clicked on the attachment, my hands trembling so badly I almost missed the icon. As I scrolled through the legalese, the world seemed to blur around me. David was citing irreconcilable differences. The standard, soul-crushing cliché. He wanted half of everything we'd built together. Except, there was one thing he didn't know. A secret I'd been keeping close to my chest. A secret that could change everything. I had just finalized the sale of my startup, CodeBloom, for $800,000. CodeBloom, my baby, my passion project, born from late nights fueled by caffeine and sheer determination, nurtured through countless setbacks and near failures. David had been supportive, sure, but he never truly understood the sacrifices I'd made. The all-nighters, the missed anniversaries, the constant pressure. Now finally, after years of struggle, it had paid off. I was financially independent, set for life, almost. And he wanted half. The irony was enough to make me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the otherwise silent apartment. He was leaving me, thinking I was still the struggling entrepreneur, scraping by on ramen noodles and hope. He had no idea I was sitting on a small fortune. Why hadn't I told him? That was the question clawing at my conscience. Partly, it was superstition. I wanted the deal to be 100% finalized before I breathed a word. Partly, it was something else. A growing distance between us, a sense that we were living separate lives, even under the same roof. And maybe, just maybe, a small, rebellious part of me wanted to see his face when he found out. But the divorce papers, they were a punch to the gut. They were final. They were real. And then I saw it, buried in the fine print. A clause about spousal support. He was demanding it. From me. David, the man who earned twice as much as I did during most of our marriage, wanted my money. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. This wasn't just about irreconcilable differences. This was about greed. This was about him thinking he could take me for everything I was worth. I slammed my laptop shut. No, I wouldn't let him. I would fight this. I picked up my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed my lawyer, Sarah. Sarah, it's me. David filed. And you're not going to believe this. Sarah, bless her, was a bulldog in a silk suit. She listened patiently as I ranted, her voice calm and reassuring on the other end of the line. Okay, take a deep breath, she said. We'll handle this. We'll fight him every step of the way. And don't worry about the startup money. We'll protect it. Protect it. That was the key. David couldn't find out about the sale. Not yet. It would completely change the dynamic of the divorce proceedings. Sarah advised me to keep a low profile, avoid any public displays of wealth, and, most importantly, not tell David about the money. She would handle all communication. Easier said than done. Avoiding David was impossible. We still lived in the same apartment. Awkward silences hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the click of the TV remote. We were like two strangers sharing a cramped space, each desperately trying to avoid the other. The atmosphere at work wasn't much better. David was the CEO of a mid-size marketing firm, and I was the head of creative. We had always been a power couple, respected and admired by our colleagues. Now, everyone was walking on eggshells around us. The whispers started almost immediately. I could feel the eyes on me, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The rumor mill was churning, fueled by speculation and gossip. And then there was Emily. Emily was David's secretary. Young, ambitious, and undeniably attractive. She had always been overly friendly to David, lingering a little too long during conversations, her laughter a little too bright. I had dismissed it as harmless flirting, the kind that was common in the workplace. But now I wasn't so sure. I started noticing things I had missed before. The way Emily's eyes lingered on David, the subtle touches, the knowing smiles they exchanged. A cold dread began to creep into my heart. Was there something going on between them? Was Emily the reason David was filing for divorce? I tried to dismiss the thought as paranoia, fueled by hurt and anger. But the feeling persisted, a nagging voice in the back of my mind. One afternoon, I was working late in my office when I overheard a conversation between Emily and another colleague. Sarah, not my lawyer Sarah, another Sarah from accounting. I just don't understand what he sees in her, Emily was saying, her voice dripping with disdain. She's so ordinary, and she's always working. Doesn't she realize that David needs attention? Sarah laughed. Well, he's certainly getting plenty of attention from you, Emily giggled. He's a very attractive man, and he deserves to be happy. I froze, my blood turning to ice. They were talking about me. And about David. I wanted to burst into the room and confront them, demand to know what was going on. But something held me back. I needed to know more. I strained to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. And he's so stressed about the divorce, Emily continued. He's worried about the finances. He thinks she's going to bleed him dry. Sarah sighed. Well, she probably is. I heard Code Bloom isn't doing so well. Poor David, Code Bloom. They were talking about my startup, about my money. A wave of nausea washed over me. How did they know? The sale was supposed to be confidential. Only a handful of people knew about it. And then it hit me. Emily! Emily must have somehow found out about the sale. Maybe she had access to David's emails, or maybe she had overheard a conversation. However she found out, she was using the information to manipulate David, to turn him against me. And she was succeeding. The realization hit me like a physical blow. David wasn't just divorcing me. He was being manipulated. And Emily was the puppet master. I quietly slipped away from the office, my mind reeling. I needed to talk to Sarah, and I needed to figure out how to expose Emily's scheme before it was too late. Sarah was furious when I told her about Emily. This is beyond inappropriate, she said. This is potentially illegal. We need to be careful. She advised me to gather evidence, to document any interactions I had with Emily, and to be discreet. We couldn't risk alerting Emily to the fact that we were on to her. Easier said than done. Working in the same office as Emily was torture. Every time I saw her, my blood boiled. She would smile sweetly at me, her eyes glinting with a knowing look that made my skin crawl. I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior. I noticed that she spent a lot of time on her phone, often texting while David was in meetings. I also noticed that she seemed to have an uncanny ability to anticipate David's needs, always knowing what he wanted before he even asked. It was clear that she was deeply entrenched in David's life. She was his gatekeeper, his confidant, and, I suspected, much more. I knew I had to find proof of their affair and of Emily's manipulation. But how? I couldn't just barge into David's office and demand to see his phone, and I couldn't risk hiring a private investigator. That would be too obvious. I needed a mole. Someone on the inside, someone who could get close to Emily and gather information without raising suspicion. And then I thought of Mark. Mark was a junior marketing associate who worked closely with Emily. He was young, eager to please, and, more importantly, he had a crush on me. He had made it clear, in subtle ways, that he found me attractive. I had always politely brushed him off, but now I needed his help. I called Mark into my office. He looked nervous and excited at the same time. Mark, the first need your help, I said. my voice low and serious. He leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. Anything your name? Anything at all. I explained the situation to him, carefully omitting the details about the startup sale. I told him that I suspected Emily was having an affair with David and that she was manipulating him into filing for divorce. I need you to keep an eye on her, I said. Pay attention to her phone calls, her emails, her conversations, anything that seems suspicious. Can you do that? Mark didn't hesitate. Yes, of course. I'll do anything to help you. I felt a pang of guilt for manipulating him, but I pushed it aside. I was desperate, and I needed his help. For the next few days, Mark became my eyes and ears. He reported back to me regularly, providing me with snippets of information that slowly began to paint a clearer picture of Emily's scheme. He told me that Emily was constantly on the phone with David, even after work hours. He also told me that she had been bad-mouthing me to other colleagues, spreading rumors about my work ethic and my personal life. But the most damning piece of information came a few days later. Mark told me that he had overheard Emily talking to someone on the phone about the divorce. He couldn't hear the entire conversation, but he did hear Emily say, "Don't worry, he'll get everything he wants. She's too busy with her little startup to notice what's really going on." The confirmation hit me hard. Emily was actively working to undermine my marriage. She was playing David like a fiddle, manipulating him into giving her everything she wanted. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her get away with this. Armed with Mark's information, I went back to Sarah. We needed a plan, a way to expose Emily and her lies without jeopardizing my position or revealing the details of the startup sale prematurely. Sarah, ever the strategist, proposed a sting operation. We would set a trap for Emily, bait her into revealing her true intentions in a way that David couldn't ignore. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to get definitive proof. First, we needed to create a believable scenario. I would act as if I was desperate to save my marriage, willing to do anything to win David back. I would publicly express my regrets about neglecting him and my commitment to making things right. This would appeal to Emily's ego, making her think she had completely won. It would also give her the confidence to be more careless. Next, we would plant a bug, a hidden recording device, in David's office. Mark, using his access, would discreetly place it under David's desk. The bug would record all conversations in the office, providing us with irrefutable evidence. Finally, I would arrange a heart-to-heart with David in his office, knowing that Emily would likely be listening in. During this conversation, I would subtly steer the conversation towards Emily, giving her an opportunity to reveal her true colors. It was a gamble, but we were running out of options. The following day, I put the plan into motion. I started by leaving David a handwritten note on his desk, apologizing for my recent behavior and expressing my desire to work things out. He responded with a curt email, stating that he was unwilling to reconsider his decision, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes when I saw him in the hallway. Later that day, I ran into Emily in the break room. She smiled sweetly at me, her eyes glinting with triumph. "I'm so sorry to hear about you and David," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "He's been really stressed lately. I'm just trying to be there for him." I forced a smile. "Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that." The next step was planting the bug. Mark, bless his heart, managed to sneak into David's office during his lunch break and place the device under the desk. Now, all that was left was the final act. I called David and asked if we could talk in his office after work. He hesitated but eventually agreed. As I walked into his office, I could feel Emily's eyes on me. She was sitting at her desk, pretending to be busy, but I knew she was listening to every word. I sat down across from David, my heart pounding in my chest. "David, I know I've made mistakes," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been so focused on Code Bloom that I haven't been the wife you deserve. But I want to change. I want to fix things." David looked at me, his expression unreadable. "It's too late, your name. I've already made up my mind. But why?" I pleaded. "What changed?" He hesitated, then said, We've just grown apart. We want different things. Is there someone else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. I took a deep breath and decided to steer the conversation towards Emily. I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Emily lately, I said. She seems very supportive. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Emily is a good assistant. She's been helping me through a difficult time. I'm sure she has, I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. She seems very invested in your happiness. And then Emily took the bait. David deserves to be happy, she said, her voice loud and clear. He's a wonderful man, and he shouldn't have to put up with someone who doesn't appreciate him. I turned to face Emily, my eyes narrowed. And who exactly are you to say that, Emily? What business is it of yours? Emily stood up, her face flushed. I'm just saying that David deserves better. He deserves someone who puts him first, someone who appreciates everything he does. And you think you're that someone? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Emily hesitated for a moment, then said, I think I could be. There it was. The confirmation I needed. I stood up, my voice filled with controlled anger. You know what, Emily? I've had enough of this. You've been manipulating David, trying to break up my marriage. And you know what? It's not going to work. David looked at me, his face a mask of confusion. What are you talking about, your name? I turned to him, my eyes filled with tears. David, Emily has been lying to you. She's been telling you things about me that aren't true. She's been trying to turn you against me. Emily scoffed. That's ridiculous. I would never do that. Oh, really? I said, pulling out my phone. Then explain this. I played the recording from the bug, the recording of Emily's conversation with her friend, the recording of her admitting that she was trying to manipulate David. As the recording played, David's face slowly turned from confusion to shock to disbelief. He stared at Emily, his eyes filled with betrayal. When the recording ended, the room was silent. Finally, David spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Emily, is this true? Emily didn't answer. She just stood there, her face white as a ghost. David stood up, his voice trembling with rage. Get out, Emily. Get out of my office. Get out of my life. Emily burst into tears and ran out of the office. I turned to David, my heart pounding in my chest. David, But he cut me off. I need some time to think. Your name, he said, his voice cold and distant. Please, just go. I left his office, my mind reeling. I had exposed Emily, but at what cost? Had I just destroyed my marriage completely? The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, tense phone calls with Sarah, and agonizing introspection. David moved out of the apartment, the silence he left behind deafening. The office was a minefield of awkward glances and hushed whispers. Emily was gone, fired immediately after the recording surfaced. I felt numb. The initial rush of anger and determination had faded, replaced by a profound sense of loss. I had fought for my marriage, but in doing so, I had uncovered a truth that was more painful than I could have imagined. David was not the man I thought he was. He was easily manipulated, blinded by flattery and ambition. He had been willing to throw away 8 years of our life together based on the lies of a manipulative secretary. And I had become so focused on my career, on building Code Bloom, that I had neglected my marriage. I had allowed a distance to grow between us, creating the space for Emily to slither in. Was there any way to salvage what was left? Could we rebuild trust after so much damage? Sarah advised me to wait, to give David time to process everything. She was still confident that we could protect the startup money, but she warned me that the divorce proceedings were likely to become even more contentious. One evening, I was sitting alone in the apartment, staring at the city lights, when my phone rang. It was David. My heart leaped into my throat. Hello? I said, my voice trembling. Can we talk? He asked, his voice subdued. Yes, I said. Where? Meet me at the Corner Bistro, he said. The place where we had our first date. The Corner Bistro. A wave of nostalgia washed over me. It was a small, cozy restaurant, with checkered tablecloths and candlelit tables. A place filled with happy memories. I arrived at the bistro early, my nerves on edge. I sat at our old table, watching the door, waiting for David to arrive. When he finally walked in, he looked different. His face was drawn, his eyes were tired, and he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He sat down across from me, avoiding my gaze. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything." I didn't say anything. I just waited for him to continue. "I was an idiot," he said. "I let Emily manipulate me. I believed her lies. I almost threw away everything we had." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. I don't know what I was thinking. "Why, David?" I asked, my voice filled with pain. "Why did you do it?" He sighed. "I was feeling insecure. I felt like I was losing you. You were always working, always focused on Code Bloom. I felt like I wasn't good enough for you." "And Emily made you feel better?" I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. He nodded. "She made me feel like I was important, like I was needed. She flattered me. She praised me. She made me feel like I was the center of her world." "And you believed her?" I asked. "I wanted to believe her," he said. "I wanted to believe that someone still cared about me." I looked at him, my heart aching with a mix of anger, sadness, and something else. "Pity!" "David," I said, my voice soft, "you are important, and I do care about you. But you have to understand that what you did was wrong. You can't just throw away our marriage because you're feeling insecure." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I know," he said. "I know I messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want to try to make things right. I want to try to win you back." I looked at him, my mind racing. Could I forgive him? Could I trust him again? I didn't know. "David," I said, "I need time. I need time to think about everything that's happened. I need time to decide if I can ever trust you again." He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I understand," he said. "I'll give you all the time you need." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of our past hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke. "There's something else you need to know," I said. He looked at me, his expression curious. "I sold Code Bloom," I said, "for $800,000. His eyes widened in shock. You what?" I nodded. "I finalized the sale just before you filed for divorce. I was going to tell you, but then everything happened." He stared at me, his mouth agape. "You're rich?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Not exactly rich," I said. "But I'm comfortable." "And you were about to divorce me thinking I was broke." His face turned red with embarrassment. I didn't know," he stammered. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the point." The revelation hung in the air between us, changing the dynamic of our conversation once again. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. Despite David's remorse, Sarah advised me to proceed cautiously. We negotiated a settlement that protected the majority of the startup money, ensuring that I wouldn't be financially vulnerable. David didn't fight it. He seemed genuinely ashamed of his actions, willing to accept whatever terms I proposed. The divorce was finalized. 8 years of our lives reduced to a stack of legal documents. We were officially over. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a quiet sense of liberation. I was free to start over, free to pursue my own dreams, free to find someone who truly valued me for who I was. In the aftermath of the divorce, I decided to take some time for myself. I traveled to Italy, a long-held dream. I spent weeks exploring ancient ruins, indulging in delicious food, and soaking up the vibrant culture. It was during this trip that I began to heal, to let go of the pain and anger that had consumed me for so long. I realized that I deserved to be happy, and that I wouldn't let David's betrayal define me. When I returned from Italy, I felt like a different person. stronger, more confident, and more determined than ever before. I decided to reinvest the startup money in a new venture, a coding school for underprivileged girls. I wanted to give back to the community, to empower young women to pursue their dreams, just as I had done. The coding school was a huge success. Within a year, it had expanded to multiple locations, providing hundreds of girls with valuable skills and opportunities. I was finally happy. I had found my purpose, and I was making a difference in the world. One day, I received an unexpected email. It was from David. He asked if we could meet for coffee. He said he had something important to tell me. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I was curious to know what he wanted. We met at a small cafe near my office. He looked healthier than I had seen him in months. He was smiling. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For what?" "For being so strong," he said. "For not letting me destroy your life. For giving me the opportunity to learn from my mistakes." He paused, then said, "I'm getting married." I was surprised, but I managed to keep my composure. "Congratulations," I said. "Who's the lucky woman?" He smiled. "Her name is Jessica. She's a therapist. She's helped me a lot over the past few months." I nodded. "I'm glad you found someone," I said. "Someone who makes you happy?" "Me too," he said. "And I wanted to tell you something else. I know about the coding school. It's amazing." "You're doing great things, your name." "Thank you," I said. We talked for a few more minutes, catching up on each other's lives. It was surprisingly pleasant. There was no animosity, no bitterness, just two people who had once shared a life together, now moving on to different paths. As I was leaving, David stopped me. "There's one more thing," he said. "I found something in Emily's apartment after she was fired. I think you should see it." He handed me a small, sealed envelope. "What is it?" I asked. "Just open it," he said. "You'll understand." I took the envelope and thanked him. I went back to my office and sat down at my desk. I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the contents. It was a USB drive. I plugged the USB drive into my computer and opened the files. What I found shocked me to my core. It was a folder filled with documents, emails, and photographs. Documents related to CodeBloom, emails between me and my investors, photographs of my apartment. And then I saw it. A document labeled CodeBloom Sale Strategy. It was a detailed plan outlining how Emily had discovered the information about the startup sale, how she had manipulated David, and how she had intended to steal the money for herself. I scrolled through the document, my blood running cold. Emily had been planning this for months. She had been systematically gathering information, exploiting David's insecurities, and plotting to ruin my life. And then I saw something that made my stomach churn. A photograph. A photograph of me, taken through my apartment window. I zoomed in on the photograph, my eyes scanning the background. And then I saw it. A figure in the shadows. A figure holding a camera. Emily! But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, his face partially obscured by the darkness, was Mark. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mark! My mole. My supposed ally. He had been working with Emily all along. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, forming a horrifying picture. Mark hadn't been helping me. He had been feeding information to Emily, helping her to orchestrate her plan. He had used his crush on me as a cover, gaining my trust so he could betray me in the most devastating way possible. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted someone who was so clearly manipulating me? I spent the next few hours poring over the files on the USB drive, piecing together the full extent of Emily and Mark's scheme. They had planned everything meticulously. They had intended to not only break up my marriage, but also to steal the startup money and leave me with nothing. Emily would seduce David, convince him that I was a neglectful wife, and manipulate him into divorcing me. Mark would feed her information about CodeBloom and my finances, ensuring that she had all the ammunition she needed. Once the divorce was finalized, Emily would convince David to invest the startup money in a fraudulent business venture, secretly controlled by her and Mark. They would then disappear with the money, leaving David and me both penniless and heartbroken. It was a cruel and elaborate plan driven by greed and malice, and I had almost fallen for it. I immediately called Sarah, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "Sarah, you won't believe what I just found," I said. "It's even worse than we thought." I explained everything to her, detailing the contents of the USB drive and revealing Mark's involvement in the scheme. Sarah was livid. "This is outrageous," she said. "This is criminal. We need to go to the police." I agreed. Emily and Mark had to be held accountable for their actions. The next day, Sarah and I went to the police station and filed a report. We presented the USB drive as evidence, along with a detailed account of Emily and Mark's scheme. The police took the case seriously and launched an investigation. Within a few days, they had arrested Emily and Mark. They were charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and invasion of privacy. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and they had no choice but to confess. The news of their arrest spread quickly throughout the office. Everyone was shocked and disgusted by their betrayal. I received numerous messages of support from my colleagues, many of whom had been suspicious of Emily and Mark for some time. I also received a message from David. "I'm so sorry, your name," he wrote. "I had no idea. I feel terrible for what you've been through." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. The trial of Emily and Mark was a media circus. The details of their scheme were splashed across newspapers and television screens. The prosecution presented a strong case, and the jury found them guilty on all counts. Emily was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Mark received a 3-year sentence. Justice had been served. But even though Emily and Mark were behind bars, I still felt a sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, something that Emily hadn't revealed. A few weeks after the trial, I received a letter from Emily. It was handwritten, on cheap lined paper. "I know you hate me," she wrote, "and I deserve it. But I need to tell you something I couldn't tell the police." She went on to explain that while she and Mark had planned to steal the startup money, there was someone else involved. Someone who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. "I can't tell you who it is," she wrote. "They would kill me. But they were the one who gave me the idea. They were the one who provided me with the resources. They were the one who made it all possible." She ended the letter with a plea for forgiveness. I read the letter several times, my mind racing. Who was this mysterious puppet master? Who had orchestrated the entire scheme? I knew I had to find out. I contacted a private investigator, a woman named Olivia. She was known for her discretion and her ability to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply buried it was. I hired Olivia to investigate Emily's claims, to find out who was the real mastermind behind the scheme. Olivia started by interviewing Emily in prison. Emily was reluctant to talk, but Olivia eventually managed to gain her trust. Emily revealed that the puppet master was someone I knew, someone I had worked with for years, someone who had always seemed to be on my side, someone who had a vested interest in seeing me fail. The puppet master was, my business partner, Robert. Robert and I had founded CodeBloom together. We had been friends for years, supporting each other through thick and thin. But behind his friendly facade, Robert harbored a deep resentment towards me. He felt that I was getting all the credit for CodeBloom's success, while he was being overlooked. He had secretly been plotting to take over the company, to push me out and claim all the glory for himself. When he learned about the startup sale, he saw an opportunity to get rid of me for good. He contacted Emily, a disgruntled employee who had been passed over for a promotion, and offered her a deal. He would provide her with the information and resources she needed to break up my marriage and steal the startup money. In return, she would help him take control of CodeBloom. It was a brilliant and ruthless plan, and it had almost worked. Olivia gathered evidence to support Emily's claims, including emails, financial records, and witness testimonies. We presented the evidence to the police, who launched a new investigation. Robert was arrested and charged with conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. He denied the charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The truth had finally been revealed. I felt a sense of closure, of finally understanding the full extent of the betrayal I had suffered, but I also felt a profound sense of sadness. I had lost so much: my marriage, my business partnership, my trust in others. In the aftermath of the Robert scandal, I sold my share of Code Bloom and walked away. The company was tainted by the betrayal, and I no longer wanted to be associated with it. I decided to focus on my coding school for underprivileged girls. It was my passion, my purpose, and it brought me a sense of fulfillment that I had never experienced before. I also started dating again. I met a wonderful man named Alex. He was kind, compassionate, and supportive. He valued me for who I was, not for my money or my success. We fell in love and we got married. I finally found happiness. One day, I received a letter from David. He was writing from prison. He explained that he had been convicted of fraud and embezzlement. He had invested the money from the divorce settlement in a fraudulent business venture, just as Emily had planned. He was serving a 5-year sentence. He ended the letter with an apology. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he wrote, "but I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything I did. You were right about Emily. You were right about everything. I was a fool. I didn't respond." I had nothing left to say to him. I closed the letter and tossed it into the fireplace. The flames consumed it, turning it to ash. I turned to face my husband, Alex. He smiled at me, his eyes filled with love. I smiled back. The past was behind me. The future was bright. Years passed. My coding school flourished, expanding to multiple countries and empowering thousands of young women. Alex and I built a beautiful life together, filled with love, laughter, and adventure. One day, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from Olivia, the private investigator. "I have some news for you," she said. "Remember Mark, the one who worked with Emily?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yes," I said. "What about him?" "He's getting out of prison," she said. "And he wants to meet with you." I hesitated. Why would Mark want to meet with me? What could he possibly have to say? But curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet with him. We met at a small park on the outskirts of the city. Mark looked older, thinner, and more subdued than I remembered. He sat down across from me, avoiding my gaze. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you want to see me? Why did you want to see me, Mark?" I asked, my voice cold and cautious. He took a deep breath and finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with shame. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for everything I did, for betraying you, for helping Emily. I know it doesn't excuse my actions, but I was young and stupid and manipulated." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Emily was persuasive," he said. "She knew how to get to me. She played on my insecurities, my ambition, my feelings for you." He paused, then said, "I know you probably don't believe me, but I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to impress Emily, to be someone she would notice. And helping her ruin my life was the way to do that?" I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. He flinched. "I know it sounds crazy," he said, "but at the time it felt like the right thing to do. I was so blinded by my feelings for Emily that I couldn't see what I was really doing." "And now?" I asked. "Now you see?" He nodded. "Now I see everything. I see the damage I caused. I see the pain I inflicted. And I'm truly sorry." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He handed it to me. It was a photograph of Emily, a recent photograph taken after she was released from prison. She looked different, older, hardened, and alone. She's not doing well, Mark said. She's struggling to find work. She's estranged from her family. She's paying the price for her actions. I looked at the photograph, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. Pity, anger, and a faint glimmer of something else. Understanding? Why are you showing me this, Mark? I asked. He shrugged. I don't know, he said. I guess I just wanted you to see that. We both lost. We all lost. He stood up to leave. There's one more thing, he said. Emily asked me to give you something. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was your grandmother's, he said. She stole it from your apartment. She said she wanted you to have it back. I stared at the locket, my heart pounding in my chest. My grandmother's locket. I had thought it was lost forever. I took the locket from him, my fingers trembling. Thank you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I sat on the park bench, clutching the locket in my hand. I opened it and looked inside. There was a tiny photograph of my grandmother, a kind and loving woman who had always been my rock. Tears welled up in my eyes. I closed the locket and held it close to my heart. The circle was finally complete. I had faced my demons, forgiven my enemies, and reclaimed my past. I was free, and I was ready to embrace the future with all its possibilities. I stood up and walked out of the park into the sunlight. My grandmother's locket, a symbol of hope and resilience, hung around my neck, a reminder of the strength I had found within myself.